Tonight, we begin with a targeted assassination that Russian intelligence agencies should have stopped, that Kremlin officials insisted was impossible, and that Vladimir Putin's inner circle assumed was protected. This assassination took place not on the battlefields of Ukraine in disputed territories, but in the very heart of Moscow, in a protected area of fortified residence, the center of Russian authority. At 6:14 this morning, General Dmitry Volov, Deputy Chief of the General Staff of Russia and the mastermind of Russia's winter offensive strategy, was killed. Yes, you heard that right. He wasn't arrested or wounded. He was killed. The explosion that ended his life wasn't the result of a rogue Ukrainian drone entering Russian territory. It resulted from such a perfectly coordinated attack that 6 seconds after his security detail confirmed the area was secure, the drone exploded just 15 meters from the entrance to his residence within death zone. They were wrong. And in the 90 minutes following the explosion, something happened that revealed far more about the state of the Russian command than any combat assessment could convey. Vladimir Putin was transferred to an unknown secure facility. The leader of the Russian Federation, the man who displays power at every opportunity, was evacuated to a protective bunker because Ukraine has shown that it can eliminate anyone, anywhere, at any time. Tonight, we will show exactly how this unfolded, how Ukraine implemented it, and why the Kremlin has been experiencing greater anxiety since the beginning of this conflict. For months, there have been whispers, not from official intelligence sources or government statements, but simply that Ukraine was building a capacity that would fundamentally change the way this conflict is conducted. Ukrainian special operations were certainly creative, but they were systematic in their creativity. Target selection was tied to a specific hierarchy, a framework, almost a strategic doctrine. Attack supply lists, weaken command structures, eliminate facilitators, and so on. But what triggered serious concern in Moscow this winter was that the framework intensified. Mid-tier commanders began perishing under questionable conditions. Military commentators with intelligence ties went. Individuals associated with combat planning started moving with augmented protection teams. Russian counterintelligence operatives recognized the warning signs, the abnormal activity of identified Ukrainian agents in frontier zones, the heightened signals intelligence operations surrounding protected communication networks, the testing of security measures at critical installations, the inquiries being made by contacts no one had communicated with in years. Someone was charting something. Someone was monitoring someone. And Russian security apparatus couldn't detect who until this morning when they discovered the answer through brutal means. Early Tuesday morning, Moscow time, inhabitants of the Rubliovka area, the privileged enclave where Russia's elite maintain their personal properties, reported what they first assumed was a natural gas incident. But natural gas incidents don't create craters in driveways. Natural gas incidents don't disperse armored vehicle debris across 200 meters. Gas incidents don't immediately lead to military cordons being established in populated areas. Within moments, the reality became uncontrollable. Russian emergency services internally characterized the event as a targeted kinetic event, a term that implies assassination but doesn't directly refer to it as such. It was confirmed that 3-star General Dmitry Volov, who had direct access to Putin's strategic planning meetings, was killed on the spot. His driver was killed instantly. His bodyguard lived long enough to report that the attack came from above before dying on the way to medical facility. From above, in Russia's most heavily guarded airspace, in a property that should only be accessible to authorized security personnel. Ukraine didn't just kill a general, they killed him in his residence. They killed him in the place that needed the most protection. And they did it with a precision that Russian intelligence feared even more than the killing itself. Someone from inside helped. The Kremlin's response, which emerged on Tuesday morning, was not disciplined. It wasn't calculated. This wasn't a coordinated effort. It was an emergency alert. Within 45 minutes of the attack being confirmed, Moscow activated security measures not seen since the initial stages of the conflict. Presidential movement restrictions, communication cuts, and the urgent deployment of high-ranking officials. Sources familiar with Kremlin security operations described the situation as a chaotic situation that was difficult to control. Security teams were unsure whether Vlad's assassination was a single attack or the beginning of a larger operation. In the 90 minutes following the explosion, the following can be summarized. Putin was moved from his residence to a secret bunker. This measure was not acknowledged by Russian state television, but was confirmed by Western intelligence through numerous channels. Defense Minister Shoigu was moved to a military operations center outside Moscow. At least 4 other high-ranking military commanders were placed under heightened security measures, and planned public appearances were canceled. The Russian leadership did not simply react to an assassination. They reacted to the possibility that they themselves could have been the target. And this observable, systemic, clearly visible anxiety is Ukraine's real success today. The fear is not just the elimination of a single general, but the dismantling of an entire governing structure. Western intelligence sources confirmed that the attack on General Volov used an adapted staggered weapon system, an unmanned vehicle capable of orbiting the target area for extended periods before striking with precision. However, this wasn't a conventional Shahed-type platform. It was something more compact, quieter, and specifically designed to circumvent the air defense networks that Russia has deployed around Moscow since the start of the conflict. What made this operation extraordinary, in your opinion? The chronology. Volov's morning schedule wasn't readily available information. The time of departure, the choice of transport, the route. All of this was protected by security measures designed precisely to prevent this type of targeting. Yet someone had this information. Someone with authority passed this intelligence to Ukrainian services, and Ukraine used it to deploy its assets in precisely the right place at precisely the right time. The location. Rublievka isn't just an elite community. It's a secure area with controlled airspace and monitoring networks designed to detect unauthorized air movements. Where the FSB is deployed, the drone that eliminated Volov had bypassed all these security measures. Either Russian air defenses collapsed catastrophically, or the platform used was advanced enough to overcome them. Either scenario is ultimately a confidence-shattering situation for Moscow. The explosive charge, initial damage assessments indicate a relatively limited explosive charge. Perhaps 5 to 8 kilograms, but it hit the vehicle's upper surface with absolute precision. This wasn't an area bombardment. This wasn't an attempt to hit something. This was a guided weapon hitting a moving target with centimeter-level precision. The withdrawal. As of tonight, no drone wreckage has been officially recovered. Either the platform was completely destroyed in the explosion, or its fragments are being hidden from the public, while Russian intelligence tries to figure out what they were up against. In other words, Ukraine didn't just kill a general. They demonstrated a capability Russia was unaware of. They breached security that Russia assumed was impenetrable, and even left Moscow questioning what else they were unaware of. And that's where the narrative becomes even more significant. Western intelligence experts have now concluded that General Volov was not a random target. He was specifically targeted and deliberately followed. Volov was not a publicly known figure like Defense Minister Shoigu or Chief of General Staff Gerasimov. He was an officer who operated in the clandestine layers of Russian military coordination, translating Putin's strategic goals into actionable directives. According to sources familiar with his role, he was the one who ensured the functioning of the military apparatus. When Putin wanted a winter offensive, Volov structured it. When the Kremlin wanted to intensify attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure, Volov organized. When Russian troops needed restructuring after defeats on the battlefield, Volov accomplished it. Eliminating him wasn't just about eliminating a general. It eliminated institutional expertise. It eliminated connections with subordinate commanders. It eliminated the continuity that allowed large military organizations to operate. Some military experts describe this as leadership beheading, a method of eliminating critical figures not for their representative value, but because they are operationally irreplaceable. Ukraine didn't eliminate Volov because he was well known. It eliminated him because he was indispensable. Finding a successor with his background, connections, and understanding of current operations will take months. Months that Russia cannot spare. Months during which intended campaigns will falter, synchronization will deteriorate, and the Russian military will function with compromised capability. One drone, one general, one morning, and Russia's strategic planning is delayed further than any combat defeat could achieve. As evaluation progressed throughout Tuesday, we discovered more regarding the magnitude of security firming. Kremlin security procedures have been entirely restructured as of this morning. Senior administrators are being counseled to randomize their activities, abandon established patterns, and presume that their schedules may be compromised. FSB counterintelligence has launched what contacts describe as the most extensive internal inquiry since the Cold War period, attempting to determine how Volov's activities were known to Ukrainian intelligence. Military command distribution is being expedited, with senior commanders reportedly being relocated away from Moscow and distributed to regional command facilities where they constitute less concentrated objectives. Air defense repositioning is progressing, with systems being withdrawn from other zones to strengthen the Moscow defensive perimeter, a reallocation that diminishes coverage elsewhere. This wasn't simply an assassination. This was institutional destabilization. This was Russia being compelled to expend resources defending itself rather than assaulting Ukraine. And institutional destabilization is how smaller forces overcome larger ones. They believed geographic separation from the combat zones meant security. They believed security procedures refined over generations would prevent precisely this category of targeting. They believed Ukraine would never attempt to strike inside Moscow proper, much less at the private property of a senior general. But tonight, the precise inverse has occurred. Distance offered no security. Security procedures failed entirely, and Ukraine demonstrated that audacity is precisely what they maintain. The previous occasion a Russian general of this rank was assassinated during active hostilities was during the Chechen conflicts. And those eliminations occurred in the combat zone proper, not in the capital. The previous occasion Moscow witnessed targeted political violence at this magnitude was the 2015 elimination of opposition figure Boris Nemtsov, an incident Russia attributed to Chechen extremists. There exists no historical parallel for what transpired today. A foreign opponent penetrated Russian capital security and eliminated a serving senior general in his personal driveway. That statement would have been regarded as fiction 3 years previously. Today, it's the headline. What renders this moment so unstable and so meaningful is that Volov's assassination occurred at a period when Vladimir Putin's legitimacy depends wholly on the impression military extremists demand aggressive retaliation. Security agencies demand explanations for how this transpired. The Russian elite demand confirmation that they aren't subsequent. The population demands to comprehend why their special military operation has transported conflict to Moscow's most privileged community. Putin is managing these demands while personally encountering something he has infrequently experienced: susceptibility. He was transferred to a bunker. That image, even if never officially acknowledged, will disseminate among Russian elites. Their president concealing. Their president fearful. Their president incapable of protecting even his own general. When leaders in that position confront this category of humiliation, they don't react logically. They react with intensification. They react with violence designed to restore the appearance of power. They react with actions that risk expanding beyond management. The subsequent 72 hours will be critical, not because of what Ukraine might execute, but because of what Putin might execute in reaction. Washington's carefully tuned response was designed to acknowledge the event without confirming or condemning it. This is not hard to see. State Department officials explicitly stated that they were observing reports of an incident in Moscow, but avoided commenting on intelligence matters or alleged Ukrainian operations. This means, in diplomatic terminology, we are not confirming anything, but we are not condemning anything either. Pentagon officials stated that legitimate military targets exist wherever warring parties are coordinating operations against Ukraine. This language implicitly supports targeting high-ranking military personnel regardless of their position. NATO's statement was remarkably concise. merely stating that Russia's aggressive conflict continues to produce consequences Moscow did not foresee. European officials speaking privately used more explicit language. One described the attack as an incident demonstrating the limits of impunity, stating that generals coordinating war crimes should not expect to die peacefully in their homes. Meanwhile, Russian officials have called for urgent UN Security Council sessions, accused Ukraine of state terrorism, and threatened extraordinary retaliation. These threats are taken seriously, but equally important is the fact that Russia's threats consistently exceed Russia's capability. Furthermore, President Zelensky addressed the situation with a short but deliberate statement on Tuesday evening. He said that Ukraine does not comment on specific operations, but consistently states that those waging war against our people will find no refuge. He stated that distance does not provide immunity, rank does not provide immunity. Only ending this conflict provides immunity. And he said that every general who coordinated the attacks on Ukrainian hospitals, Ukrainian schools, Ukrainian families should ask himself tonight, how truly protected am I? These are not rhetorical embellishments. These are psychological operations conveyed through official platforms. Zelensky is informing every Russian commander, every strategic planner, every officer responsible for casualties that you are not protected. And from today onwards, this communication is no longer theoretical. It has been confirmed. This is what makes the situation even more worrying for the Russian command. The assassination of Volov was not an isolated incident. In addition to the Moscow attack, a senior FSB officer was injured in a suspected car bomb attack in Belgorod on Monday. This attack, initially appearing unrelated, is now being reevaluated. Intercepted communications show that at least 2 senior Russian military officials have moved to more secure positions following threat warnings last week. Ukrainian military intelligence released a mysterious statement last week, pointing to a specific focus on those responsible for terrorism. This statement is now understood as a warning of precisely this type of campaign. All this points to a coordinated targeting attempt, not an isolated operation. It is disturbing when Ukraine displays this capability even once. When they display it as part of a pattern, it is a strategy, and that strategy seems to be to eliminate one by one the Russian officers who made this conflict possible, wherever they are located. Intelligence experts are currently evaluating various scenarios for what will happen next. One scenario is that Russia intensifies its attacks on targets of the Ukrainian leadership in retaliation. This response risks making Putin and his inner circle even more legitimate targets under the protocols of armed conflict. Another scenario is that Moscow further restricts the activities of its top officials, confining its own leadership structure behind security barriers, and jeopardizing the operational effectiveness and assigning protection. A third scenario, most closely watched by Western leaders, is that Putin allows a dramatic escalation designed to restore deterrence. Expanded attacks on Kyiv, attacks on Western supply routes, or even more dangerous alternatives. But one element is certain today that we can all see. Ukraine has changed the parameters. They have shown that Russian leaders cannot hide behind geography. They have confirmed that security procedures can be violated. And they have made it clear that the cost of waging this conflict can now be measured in the lives of those coordinating it. What we are observing now is an assessment of resolve. Russia wants to confirm that this assassination will not deter its conflict efforts. Ukraine wants to confirm that they can eliminate anyone Moscow deems important. NATO wants to observe how Putin will react before adjusting its own next action. And Russia's military command, the generals, colonels, and coordinators who woke up this morning assuming they were safe, wants to understand whether they should continue to serve in a conflict that may now demand their lives. This last question may be the most important, because when military commanders begin to compare personal survival to professional obligation, when they begin to question whether strategic planning sessions are worth the risk of becoming targets themselves, when they begin to understand that being close to Putin may mean being close to danger rather than being close to power, the entire foundation of the authoritarian military command begins to crumble. This is not just about one general. This is about whether Russia's military elite will continue to function as willing instruments of Putin's strategic ambitions, or whether they will begin to influence self-defense calculations in ways Moscow cannot control. Tonight, we received information from intelligence chiefs monitoring Russian communications for signs of response planning. They are providing information in a diplomatic way, indicating that the Kremlin command remains in a protective position, meaning that top officials are in secure positions, not in normal operational environment. They report that the Russian military command has distributed instructions for enhanced personal security protocols among all general officers, effectively acknowledging that today's attack could be repeated. They report increased communication activity between Moscow and regional military districts, indicating coordination of protective measures across the entire command structure. They report a psychological state that one analyst describes as a palpable sense of fragility within Russia's top military ranks, a state that cannot be easily remedied by additional security personnel or altered protocol. Because the fundamental question facing every Russian general, every top planner, every officer involved in strategic decision-making is clear and frightening. If Ukraine can reach Volov in his safe house in Rubliavka, along with his security detail in Moscow's most heavily guarded airspace, then who among them is truly safe? And if the answer is nobody, what does this mean in terms of their willingness to continue this war? We are witnessing something unprecedented. A smaller force facing a larger enemy has developed and demonstrated the ability to reach the enemy's capital and eliminate its top military commanders in their homes. This war is not over yet. We will continue to follow developments. Stay tuned to stay informed about current events.